So what we'll be doing is learning about ifstream. You have to always start your applications with an include for ifstream. Once you've done that, then you have to create the stream that you're going to be reading from or writing to. And there's two variations of the ifstream that will do that. There's one called ofstream, which stands for output file stream. And as you might guess, there's another one called ifstream, which stands for input file stream. So what we're going to do is we're going to write an application that just writes some numbers to the screen. To a file, excuse me. So I'm going to, well, I guess I already have it there. Get my boilerplate. Create a new, it's funny how they call it a project in some places and a solution in others. Alright, so along with IOStream, we're going to include FStream, specialized kind of IOStream for writing to and reading from files. And just for good measure, it's always nice to have the string class hanging out. So we need to make an ofstream. Oh, here we go. ofstream, and we could give it a nice fancy name like output file, or outf, or file, or something like that. I'm just going to call it outfs. Not as much typing. Pretend outf stands for output file. We need to open our file. Why don't we ask the user for the file that they want to open? So cout what file shall we create? Then let's create a string and call it file name, and we can read in cin into file name. All right, now we're all ready. So we create, if I was going to redo this, I would move this ofstream a little bit below that stuff, just kind of thematically, the order in which these things are done. First we ask for the file name, and then we create the file. So I'm just going to cut that ofstream and paste it down here. And then I'm going to do outf, output file, is equal to, output file dot open. And we need to pass in the file name that we just specified. Why did I make it dot? No, I haven't done that. When I create my files, when I give it a file name, I'm going to add .txt. The reason for that is just so that I can go and double click on the file and it'll open it up in Notepad. Alrighty, now we want to write some data to that file. Let's put a message saying what we're doing. Writing data to our file. And let's do it. F out instead of I really wish I'd called it F out rather than out F. It's not going to take too many changes to do that. Change out F to F out. There. Change out F to F out there. Why am I doing that? Just for the symmetry. Cout, F out. F out for the files. My favorite musicians are, let's list a few. Cout. I like Beethoven. I like Justin Bieber. And if y'all don't type that, no, I'm kidding. And Barry Manilow, for us people in the 70s. Here we go. All right, we've written some data out to the file. I don't care what you write out there, but we will be able to create this file. Now we need to close the file. So fout.close, and then let's print a message that says that we're done. Cout, done writing to file. And we may as well give them the file name, just so that they can have some happy feelings. Like that. All right, so when I run it, it says, what file should we create? Well, since it's got musicians in it, I'm going to type music.txt and hit enter. And it says, writing data to our file, done writing to file music.txt. I'd have to go look for that file. It'll be in our Visual Studio project directory. So I'm going to go looking for it. I'm just going to open up a Windows Explorer window. Go to Documents, Visual Studio 2013. Projects. Why are my projects not there? Have I been creating them somewhere else? All right, if I come over here and click on Solution Project and then do Open Folder in File Explorer, what I did is I dragged the Solution Explorer out. Open folder in File Explorer. If I peek around in here, I will see my music.txt file. There he is. I can double click on that file, and there's what we wrote out to it. My favorite musicians are Beethoven, Justin Bieber, and Barry Manilow. Now this isn't doing any error handling. It's not making sure that we open the file. Why would the file not get open? When you've done like a save from Word or something, what are some of the error conditions that you might get? Pardon me? Yeah, permissions. The file already exists, but it's been marked as read-only, you know? Then you won't be able to overwrite it. Or simpler problem would be you're out of disk space. Or you're writing to the F drive, but you've already pulled out your flash drive, and so that path no longer exists, that kind of thing. So we kind of need to actually check to see if that file was found or not before we go off willy-nilly. I'm going to run this again and try to give it a bad file name just to see what it does. What file shall we create? Well, I don't think I have an S drive. I should check. S:\t.txt. Well, what do you know? Do I have an S drive? Why did it say that it succeeded? Let's go look. No, I don't have an S drive, so I really wish it had given me an error message. If I go look out in that directory, am I going to see? Nope. Well, what do you know? It didn't show it. So this is in PowerPoint 5. Let's go look up PowerPoint 5 and see what it has to say about all this stuff. That's why we haven't hit it yet. There we go. That is a way of testing to make sure that the file actually exists or not. Kind of looks goofy. This wouldn't be how you would do it in other languages. But let's do it. Let's add an if statement that checks to see if we have a problem or not. So after we try to open the file, right here, let's check to see fout exists. If not fout, then let's print out an error message. Couldn't open plus the file name plus an ENDL, and let's just return. We're just going to kill the application, right? No, no, no. We're not going to do that. We're going to put everything in an else block. Else, if it worked, do all the rest of our stuff. So put an else in an opening brace, highlight all that stuff, all the way down to that, but not including the system pause if you're going to have it there. You Mac users won't. And there you go. So this is what we added. If not fout, write an error message. I'm going to try to force that issue again. What file shall we create? S:\t dot whatever. Yay, it gave us an error message. Couldn't open t.what.txt because I don't have an S drive. By printing out the file name, at least they're getting the idea. You know, maybe they have a clue as what's wrong. Oh, I don't have an S drive. It's really interesting to me, and I hadn't realized this until now, or I'd forgotten it, that it doesn't give you any errors if that file wasn't open. It lets you merely call fout anyways, which is kind of ridiculous. Where is it writing to? It's not writing anything. It's going along its merry way. Java and C# aren't nearly so blithely ignoring the fact that it couldn't keep the file open. Another thing you can do is use .fail to see if it worked. I would like the syntax of that better, I believe. If I change this to fout dot fail. Let's see if that works. Yeah, I like that syntax better. I wish it didn't even show the other one. That looks better to me. If you just like the if not file open, so your choice is yours. If not fout, that's one way to do it, or you can do if fout.fail. So let's do something more interesting than just writing out some musician names. To do that, what I'm going to suggest we do is to take out this cout and this cin file name. Just cut those 3 lines. And do string file name equals music.txt. That way we won't have to keep typing in a file name for the musicians and then type another file name for the next piece of data we're going to save. Once you've done that, scroll down after all that done writing file business. Paste that file shall we create. Delete that line that says string file name because we've already declared the variable up higher. Now we have a file. And what this one's going to contain is a series of numbers. We could just use a for loop to generate some numbers. But we haven't opened the file yet. So ofstream, what are we going to call this one? fout2? We need some different name. Yeah, fout2, different file. fout2.open, and let's give it that file name. And when we open it like this, It's going to erase the contents of that file if it previously existed. You could do some complicated checks to make sure, if that file name already exists, don't overwrite it. Ask them if you wish to overwrite it. But for now, it's just enough to go ahead and write to the file. Let's ask them how many numbers they want in it. See out how many numbers to write. Int nums cn into nums. And we'll have a for loop that writes out that many numbers to it. So for int x is equal to, let's write the numbers from 1 out to it rather than from 0 out. So x is equal to 1, semicolon. X is less than or equal to nums, not nulls, nums, semicolon. X plus plus. And then we forgot to check to make sure that the file was actually open. We should do that before we go too much further. Let's do it here. We really ought to do it before we do that how many numbers to write, but I'm adding it here just because it makes for less scrolling up and down. Okay, so if fout2 dot bad, no, fail. I wonder what bad does. I don't know. Then print out an error message. Cout could not open file name endl. And then put all this stuff inside an else. And I forgot to do something of critical importance. I forgot to actually call close on the file. So we're hanging out here and that music file is still open even though we're doing all sorts of other stuff. What you really want to do is you want to close the file as soon as possible. As soon as you're done writing to it, you want to close it. If you keep it open, the file system maintains kind of a lock on it, which means that if you're trying to back it up or copy it into a safe folder, you may not be able to open it. You've probably seen that kind of error message when you've grabbed files and you've tried to move them and one of them was open. You can't. So we really should have put a close on it. We will remember to do that on this one. Okay, so if it failed, we could not open, else indent that for loop so it's part of the else code. Fout, nope, fout2, that's our new file. Let's just write that number out, followed by endl. Let's do a message saying what we did. File written. And let's close that file. fout2.close. And while you're at it, scroll back up and add an fout.close to the bottom of that first else. But I want to make sure this works. Alrighty. May have worked. I will wander around and make sure it's working for all of y'all as well. Okay, when I open t.txt, which is a file name I specified, I see my 10 files. And what I wanted you to do is just like we closed the file here, I want us to close the file here where it says done writing to file in the first else. Oh, we had it there. What am I babbling about? There we go. We had it. Okay, good. All right, that'd be a good time to make sure that we're all going. And all I mean by that is let's ask them if they want to write to a file or read from a file. So what I suggest doing is calling this old main. Do int old main. The reason we're going to do that is because now we're going to write a new main that replaces it. But we still have all that code. So let's declare a string and call it choice. Let's ask them for their choice. 1, to write file. 2, to read file. I'm going to take those periods off in case they felt that they had to type the period. Let's read in our choice. I've got the wrong arrows. Now we could do a switch statement, but with only 2 options, we could just use if statements as well. So if choice equals a 1, just leave that alone for now. Gonna write file. We're going to go and get that code working in a minute, but we don't have it yet. We've already got that code down south, but we'll need to put it in its own method, in its own function. Else, let's call a file. We're going to write a function called read file. We don't have it written yet, but there we go. And after our thing that says gonna write file, we're going to have a function called write file. So tell you what, instead of calling this old main, let's call that write file. Because we've already got all the code that writes files. Now all we need to do is write one called read file. This isn't going to work until we define our skeletons here. And that is not the correct term for it. I cannot believe my mind blipped on it. What do you call it when you forward declare a function name so that it can be invoked? Oh gosh. Yeah, function declaration, but there's a specific term for it and I'm not remembering it. Okay, so, pardon?
Prototype. Yeah, prototype.
Yeah, prototype. Okay, so we need prototypes for our 2 functions or else we're going to have to move these up above main. Those are our 2 choices. So let's declare our write file function. It has no body, but we're saying what it is. And then let's declare our read file function. That way they can be declared anywhere, even in another file. And I will put a comment that these are prototypes. Okay, so now we need some code that'll read from a file. Instead of using ofstream, we're going to use ifstream. So int read file we don't have a system call here at the end of our main anymore. So I'm going to put one there. I'm going to go down to the bottom of main and do system pause, soda pause, after it writes or reads the file. Then I'm going to go into read file. We're going to declare an ifstream. Ifstream, since we always read from CIN, this is going to be a file, so why not call it FIN? And we're going to call endfile.open. Let's ask for the file name, except for you, since that absolutely was not working. I'm pretty puzzled by that. We need to declare a file name, string file name, cout, read from what file. cin into file name. And now we're ready to create our file. fin.open. File name. Now we have a file, but let's make sure it's open. If fin.fail, 5th time I've had to type it, print an error message. Cout could not write, excuse me, could not open, plus file name. Else, let's actually let's actually do some stuff with it. Gonna check something. I suppose that's one way to do it. So here's one way we could read from a file until the end of the file. We can put it in a while statement. And this looks a bit odd to me, so I used to struggle with it and do something else, but I've kind of just, submitted to this as being the proper way to do it. So let's create a variable that's going to hold our data that we read in. Number is good enough. Int number. And then while fin goes into number, we'll do something with number. Why don't we just print it out? I just read number. Once all that's done, we need to close that file. All right, write file and read file need to return values, or we need to declare them as void. So you're going to have to go down to the very bottom of write file, and after the system pause, do return 0. And then do the same thing to the bottom of read file. Go to the bottom of read file and do return 0. Just because we declared them as ints, as returning an ints, we have to return something. Main, it lets us get away with not returning anything. Now I've already got data, and I stored it in a file called t.txt, so I'm not going to do write file again. I'm just going to do t.txt, and it says I just read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it worked. We saved our data. We have some data in a file, and this read file function opened that data and read it into a series of numbers. If they were test scores, we could average them. If we wanted to, we could store this data into an array or something like that. So this is the stuff I want you to burn into your brain for today, is this write file business. And maybe we ought to do it one more time just so it's burned in. And the reason for that is I want you to modify one of your earlier assignments that wrote to the screen to save its data to a file. That's going to be the assignment. I'll just put a comment up here. Assignment, take any homework you previously did, it could be the BMR assignment or whatever, and write the output of it to a file rather than to the screen. So if you calculate their BMR, then you're going to open up a file and you're going to put, all that BMR information, calories and blah, 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 or whatever. You can also write it to the screen if you want to, do both. But that's what you have to do. It'd be nice if you asked for the output file name, like we've been doing. If you just want to hard code it and say, string file name equals whatever, or if you, Yes, sir.
Can you show read file?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's the entire function. Alrighty, so we've started a new application here that we are then going to modify to write to a file. So there it is. Pause the recording, type it in, then pick back up where we are. Okay, so we want to calculate the miles per gallon. Float MPG is equal to miles divided by gallons. So Cout, okay, I have calculated it. Your mileage is MPG followed by another set of arrows. What are you doing? Miles, space miles per gallon. Cout, that is, if you weren't lying. How rude. Okay. That's our program. Let's run it, make sure it works. And then let's say that I'd submitted this, you know, as homework 7 or whatever. Who knows? Rebuild solution. Run it. How many miles did you drive? I drove 100 miles. How much gas did you use? If I type in 0, it'll probably crash, so I'm going to type in 1. Okay, I've calculated it. Your mileage is 100 miles per gallon. It is if you weren't lying. Okay, so there's our application. Everybody got that? I know I tend to type 90 to nothing.
Yeah, you do.
What I want you to do next is, based on your other homework, your other file, or what you remember from it, create an ofstream, open it, and then write this data to it. Rather than writing it to Cout, write it to fout. So we all did so far. So what I'm going to do, I think I'll tack it onto the bottom. I've already got my statements here. I think I'll tack it onto the bottom. I'm going to need a ofstream, which means I need to # include fstream. So I need to come up here and do # include ofstream. Without that, I won't be able to use ifstream, or, excuse me, just fstream, not ofstream. My mistake. Include fstream. Once I've got that, I'm going to go back down to the bottom. We're going to ask for the file name, string file name. Cout, save data to what file name. CIN into file name. Now let's make an ifstream. Ifstream fout. I like fout because it rhymes with Cout. Fout.open the file name. So here's all the stuff we've added that's new. How do we check to make sure that file opened? I'm thinking an if statement. What are we going to put in the if statement to make sure that the file was opened successfully?
Not fout.
Yeah, not fout's the easiest one, or fout.fail. So, if not fout, we want to print an error message. Same kind we have been doing. Cout could not open, and then just write out our file name. else. Let's write that stuff out. Now we have these 3 cout statements from up here. Just copy those guys. Copy them and paste them into your else clause. And then change the C's to F's. And then call f.close, excuse me, fout.close. And let's print a final message. Now I've done something wrong. It's giving me errors there. No operator matches these operands. Work the other time. Is there an order in which these have to be included? How humiliating. Yeah, I made it an ifstream. That's for reading input. Thank you. Where it says ifstream, ifstream's for input. Change that to ofstream. Not ifstream. I was sorely vexed there for a moment. Might work. How many miles did we drive? 10. How much gas did we use? 20. You get 0.5 miles per gallon. Save data to what file name? mpg.txt. I didn't have a message apparently that said done writing file. I'm going to want to add that. But in the meantime, I'm going to go look to see if that file exists. I'm going to do open folder in File Explorer. Go into my project folder. There's an mpg.txt. And there's my output, the same stuff that was displayed to the screen. Okay, I have calculated it. Your mileage, blah, blah. That is, if you weren't lying. That's what I want you to do to one of your other homework assignments. Just modify it so that, you know, after it's done displaying its output, hopefully it's interesting output and not just, you know, a number, one number with no text around it, whatever. Then do an fout. If, or a series of fouts. If it was a complex one involving writing out an array or something like that, you'd just write out the array the same way you wrote it to screen, but with F's rather than C's. Time. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. So, the stream extraction operator returns true if a value was successfully read, false otherwise, which is why we can do this when we're reading, while input file greater than number. I'm not a true enough C++ programmer anymore for that to look like good syntax to me, but I'll just, you know, you accept it. That's the way you read into a file inside of a loop. It's one way. If you want to read in an entire line at a time, rather than just one number or name or something at a time, you do something different. So use the close member functions. Don't wait for the operating system to close the files. Once your program quits, the operating system does go ahead and close any open files. There may be a limit on the number of open files. Back in the old days, you know, Windows 3 or something like that, you had a limited number of file handles, and if your program was keeping files open, then another program might break. Letting the user specify a file name. That's what we've been doing. Ask the user for a file name and then pass it into the open method. Prior to C++ 11, these standard ratified in 2011, you had to pass in what's known as a C string, which is a null-terminated string. If you recall, we talked about that, where you had a string of characters, an array of characters, and then the last one is a null. If you had to do that, if you had to turn a string into a C string, you do it like that. The reason I'm specifying this is not because I think that you're going to have to do that, but because I want you to try it. Are you still having that file name problem? Yeah. Okay. Do that. When you try to open the file, instead of calling it file name, call it filename.c_str. So then make that file name .c_str. Didn't get an error either. What do we know? All right. What we had here is a case where we actually needed to use this information because the development tool known as Dev C++ apparently is not completely updated to support the 2011 C++ standard. So we had to convert that string to a C string, a null-terminated string, in order to pass it to the open method. Breaking and continuing a loop. I think we've talked about this, but I don't think we ever hit this slide. If you need to, you can use break to terminate execution of a loop. Use sparingly, if at all. It makes the code harder to understand and to debug. The only time we've been using it so far is I've had y'all occasionally do while true, and then if they enter a 1 or -1 or something like that, break. But you can use it inside any loop. That code that we had that wrote out 10 numbers in a row and then read that data back in, do file, close solution, file, recent projects in solution, and open the last one, not the miles per gallon one, but the one before that. So recent projects and solutions, open that. And here, go down to read file. It's inside of a while loop. We could use break to get out of it early. If I recall, that number was just the numbers between 1 and 10 or something like that. For who knows what reason, we're going to make the loop stop if we just read a 5. So, if you can find this, inside read file, inside your while loop, if number is equal to 5, break. What we set up is some condition that causes it to leave that while loop early. That's what the break statement's for. And so now when I read my file, t.txt, it says reading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it stops there. Previously, I had 10 numbers, I think. But since I put a break statement in the while loop, it caused it to leave it early. And you can do that inside of any kind of loop, a do loop, a for loop, and a while loop. Now, why the textbook is recommending you don't do this is that if you have a while loop with several hundred structures in it, words in it, lines of code, and then you give that to somebody else to maintain, or you forget about it and you come back to it 2 years later, then you're trying to figure out how the code exits the loop, and you see your while statement, and then you go absolutely nuts trying to figure out why it's leaving early, why it's exiting the loop before it's done with its job. It's because there was a break statement in it. And it makes the code harder to follow. Now, back in old days, programming languages supported something called the go-to statement. And you could have one line number here that said go to line 20. And then when it hit that one, it'd go to line 20. And the one after that might say go to line 2000. And it might run down to 2000 and then do a couple of lines. And then it might say go to 10, and whatever. And that was called spaghetti code because the go-to statements were causing the process, just to jump all over that. And generally go-tos fell out of favor pretty strongly to the point where you can't find where, there's not one in C++ or whatever. I say that. What if I type in go-to? I bet it works.
I think you gotta set up a label or something.
Yeah, you have to set up a label and then you can go to it. But, okay, we're going to forget that. Don't use go-tos. So you can bail out of a loop early with a break statement. Let's give a demonstration of this again up in main. Just scroll to the very top of main, and it doesn't really matter which program you're in. Just scroll to the top of main. Let's set up a for loop for int x is equal to 1, x is less than or equal to 100, x plus plus. What we want to do is print those numbers. So C out x followed by the end of line. But we're going to do some monkey business. We're going to say, before that, if x is greater than 60, break. That's going to stop it before it writes all 100 numbers out. And we're going to set up another condition, that if x is evenly divisible by 10, skip it. And to do that, we're going to use what's known as a continue statement. So if x modulus 10 is equal to 0, continue. So when we run it, we're going to see that it prints all the numbers between 1 and 100, except it skips the ones that are divisible by 10. And oh, by the way, it stops after it prints 60. And it's not going to even print out 60. So let's run it and see if that works. Yeah, see, not that I can scroll up and see all the numbers for some reason. Oh, because it's waiting me to do the rest of that stuff. But it printed the numbers from 1 to 60. If it stopped at 60 because of our break, it skipped the ones that were evenly divisible by 10, where modulus 10 is equal to 0. So break causes it to exit the loop. When it hits the break statement, it goes, woohoo, I'm done. Leaves the loop, no matter what the conditions are. What continue does is kind of the same thing, but instead of jumping to the end of the loop and leaving it, it jumps back up here to the top. So if this is a multiple of 10, continue. Continue causes it to jump back up here, so it never prints it out. That's what continue does. Continue is another thing that can make the code really hard to follow. I think they only devote that one page in the PowerPoint to that. Nope. Well, yeah. Use sparingly makes code harder to understand and debug. The continue statement, use sparingly. Like break, it can make the program hard to follow. If you have multiple loops, if you have a loop inside of a loop, break only breaks out of the innermost loop. Because you could have nested loops for x is equal to 1 to 10, for y is equal to 1 to 10, and then if inside that inner loop you do a break, it's going to get out of that loop, but it's still inside the outer loop, if that makes sense. All right, I think we're done. So your homework is to go find an old homework assignment and modify it to save its output to a file, just kind of like we did in the second of these in-class exercises. So this will be M file IO with ifstream and ofstream. I would put both of the projects that you've created today in there just so that you can find them again. I'm not going to give you a bad grade if you don't, but I'd put them both in there. And then the homework. Homework 9. We'll make do Sunday night. So seeing as how we have almost no time to cover enough material to make a third exam worth it, what we're going to do is, and I think I've mentioned this, is the final is going to be optional, but if you want to replace one of your lower grades with it, you can take it to do that. So if you bombed an exam, but really, y'all haven't bombed an exam, but you have the option of doing that. You won't have to take the final unless you want to, in case you want to use it to replace a low grade on another exam. Not Sunday, Tuesday. So on Monday, we're going to cover pointers and references. Pointers are something that you could devote several weeks talking about. And if you become a professional C++ programmer, you will become very familiar with the concept of pointers. Then on Wednesday, we'll either continue talking about those, or hopefully we'll get to the idea of creating our own classes.